Hello, Gino here, and you are listening to Otherworld Connections. We live in a critical time where now, more than ever, angels and fairies, hidden forces, are bursting at the seams of the veil to work with us. They want to see us change in order to save the world and live in service to others. So join me on a journey to empowerment and enlightenment with an angelic angle and a fairy focus, looking into ways to improve our current situation, morality, archetypes, solutions for self-healing, and spiritual sciences in light of theosophy and other occult traditions.
Yeah, hello. Welcome back to Otherworld Connections. I'm your host Gino, and you can listen to the Otherworld Connections on all podcast platforms. It's on my Substack. It's on, YouTube, all those thingies. And you can also listen to The Secret Kindergarten. You can download podcasts for kids and families, and you can listen to and learn about child development, early childhood education in the context of what is best for kids. My Secret Kindergarten Grown-Ups edition. And you can tune into that on Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern. But here, Otherworld Connections, we're talking about finding your vocation again. And we are learning that vocation means something more than a career or job. And it's turning out to be something that is universal. Because what's universal about all of us is that we are all individuals. And we are going to talk about animals today as our part of our traveling companions segment as well. Okay, so this show has been turning out to be covering parts of human action that aren't talked about very much because, well, I don't know. Because of social media, I believe. Charity. Well, if it wasn't for charity, Revolution Radio would not exist. And even just putting donations out of the meaning of charity, the charitable acts of everybody that volunteers to keep the show running. So if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for charity, what would there be? And Otherworld Connections explores charity, vocation, being kind, being polite, and how that sits with action in the world, how that sits with defending yourself in the world, how that sits with, fighting the good fight, balancing that with being a kind and loving person. Something like that anyway. That's how it seems to be coming out. So it's a bit of a blah 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 one today. I'm reading Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation by Parker J. Palmer, because of just this topic. I want to explore it, and I think it's a topic that needs to be explored more. It needs to be heard about, and this book goes quite deep in that. So let's just read till the bottom of the hour, or a little bit after, from the chapter Back to the World. Okay, here we go. From the depths of depression, I turn now to our shared vocation of leadership in the world of action. This may seem more like a leap than a turn, but none of the great wisdom traditions would look upon this segue with surprise. Go far enough on the inner journey. They all tell us, go past ego toward true self, and you end up not lost in narcissism, but returning to the world, bearing more gracefully the responsibilities that come with being human. These words are more than a device to weave these chapters together. They are a faithful reflection of what happened to me once I passed through the valley of depression. At the end of that descent into darkness and isolation, I found myself re-engaged with community, better able to offer leadership to the causes I care about. Leadership is a concept we often resist. It seems immodest, even self-aggrandizing, to think of ourselves as leaders. But if it is true that we are made for community, then leadership is everyone's vocation, and it can be an evasion to insist that it is not. When we live in the close-knit ecosystem called community, everyone follows and everyone leads. Even I, a person who is unfit to be president of anything, who once galloped away from institutions on a high horse, have come to understand that for better or for worse, I lead by word and deed simply because I am here doing what I do. If you are also here doing what you do, then you also exercise leadership of some sort. But modesty is only one reason we resist the idea of leadership. Cynicism our most visible leaders is another. In America, at least, our declining public life has bred too many self-serving leaders who seem lacking in ethics, compassion, and vision. But if we look again at the headlines, we will find leaders worthy of respect in places we often ignore. In South Africa, Latin America, and Eastern Europe, for example, places where people have known great darkness, have emerged to lead others toward the light. The words of one of those people, Václav Havel, playwright, dissident, prisoner, and now President of the Czech Republic, take us to the heart of what leadership means in settings both large and small. In 1990, a few months after Czechoslovakia freed itself from communist rule, Havel addressed a joint session of the US Congress. Quote, "The communist type of totalitarian system has left both our nations, Czechs and Slovaks, legacy of countless dead, an infinite spectrum of human suffering, profound economic decline, and, above all, enormous human humiliation. It has brought its horrors that fortunately you have never known. It has also given us something positive, a special capacity to look, from time to time, somewhat further than those who have not undergone this experience. Someone who cannot move and live a normal life because he is pinned under a boulder has more time to think about his hopes than someone who is not trapped in this way." We stepped out of the quote, actually. I think I copied and pasted that wrong, so this is now the author talking. I'm going to read that again because this is the important point. Someone who cannot move and live a normal life because he is pinned under a boulder has more time to think about his hopes than someone who is not trapped in this way. What I am trying to say is this: we must all learn many things from you, from how to educate our offspring and how to elect our representatives, to how to organize our economic life so that it will lead to prosperity and not poverty. But this doesn't have to be merely assistance from the well-educated, the powerful, and the wealthy, to those who have nothing to offer in return. Okay, that was a dramatic pause there, because if we all decide to acknowledge that our vocation is to, our point is to lead, then do we need what we consider to be leaders now? Do we need politicians? Do we need government? We too can offer something to you, our experience and the knowledge that has come from it, the specific experience I'm talking about has given me one certainty. Consciousness precedes being, and not the other way around, as Marxists claim. For this reason, the salvation of this human world lies nowhere else than in the human heart, in the human power to reflect in human modesty and in human responsibility. Without a global revolution in the sphere of human consciousness, nothing will change for the better, and the catastrophe towards which this world is heading, whether it be ecological, social, demographic, or general breakdown of civilization, will be unavoidable. The power for authentic leadership, Havel tells us, is found not in external arrangements, but in the human heart. Authentic leaders in every setting, from families to nation-states, aim at liberating the heart, their own and others, so that its powers can liberate the world. I cannot imagine a stronger affirmation from a more credible source of the significance of the inner life in the external affairs of our time. Consciousness precedes being, and the salvation of this human world lies nowhere else than in the human heart. And just stepping out of this reading here, I will just plug the Secret Kindergarten for Grown-Ups edition on Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern here at Revolution Radio. I am doing a study on the TV and how that damages the heart, and this is pairing up with my study that here, consciousness precedes being and the importance of the human heart. And there is a connection between the mind and the heart, and the TV damages that, and that's why TV is bad for kids, and there are solutions to that, which don't always have to be throwing the TV out the window, but that's a pretty rock star thing to do. So yeah, heart-based consciousness, very important. I just said the cliche there, very important. Oh dear. Right, back to the reading. The reading will make me sound smarter. Let's go. Material reality, Havel claims, is not the fundamental factor in the movement of human history. Consciousness is, awareness is, thought is, spirit is. These are not the ephemera of dreams. They are the inner Archimedean points from which oppressed people have gained the leverage to lift immense boulders and release transformative change. But there is another truth that Havel, a guest in our country, was too polite to tell. It is not only the Marxists who have believed that matter is more powerful than consciousness, that economics is more fundamental than spirit, that the flow of cash creates more reality than the flow of visions and ideas. Capitalists have believed these things too, and though Havel was too polite to say this to us, honesty obliges us to say it to ourselves. We capitalists have a long and crippling legacy of believing in the power of external realities much more deeply than we believe in the power of inner life. How many things have you heard or said? Those are inspiring notions, but the hard reality is ... How many times have you worked in systems based on the belief that the only changes that matter are the ones you can measure or count? How many times have you watched people kill off creativity by treating traditional policies and practices as absolute constraints on what we can do? This is not just a Marxist problem, it is a human problem. But the great insight of our spiritual traditions is that we, especially those of us who enjoy political freedom and relative affluence, are not victims of that society. We are its co-creators. We live in and through a complex interaction of spirit and matter, of the powers inside of us and the stuff out there in the world. External reality does not impinge on us as an ultimate constraint. If we who are privileged find ourselves confined, it is only because we have conspired in our own imprisonment. The spiritual traditions do not deny the reality of the outer world. They simply claim that we help make the world by projecting our spirit on it. For better or for worse, If our institutions are rigid, it is because our hearts fear change. If they set us in mindless competition with each other, it is because we value victory over all else. If they are heedless of human well-being, it is because something in us is heartless as well. We can make choices about what we are going to project, and with those choices we help grow the world that is. Consciousness precedes being. Consciousness, yours and mine, can form, deform, or reform our world. Our complicity in world making is a source of awesome and sometimes painful responsibility, and a source of profound hope for change. It is the ground of our common call to leadership, the truth that makes leaders of us all. So that I'm going to keep going. Just that chapter, or that section of that chapter is, it's just, that's vocation, I reckon, there. Being responsible, taking ownership of your life. Anyway, shadows and spirituality. I'm just going to have a sip of water. Excuse me. All right. Shadows and spirituality. A leader. Oh, this part's really good too. A leader is someone with the power to project either shadow or light onto some part of the world and onto the lives of the people who dwell there. A leader shapes the ethos in which others must live, an ethos as light-filled as heaven or as shadowy as hell. A good leader is intensely aware of the interplay of inner shadow and light, lest the act of leadership do more harm than good. I think, for example, of teachers who create the conditions under which young people must spend so many hours. Some shine a light that allows new growth to flourish, while others cast a shadow under which seedlings die. I think of parents who generate similar effects in the lives of their families, or of clergy who do the same to entire congregations. I think of corporate CEOs whose daily decisions are driven by inner dynamics, but who rarely reflect on those motives or even believe they are real. We have a long tradition of approaching leadership via the quote-unquote power of positive thinking. I want to counterbalance that approach by paying a special attention to the tendency we have as leaders to project more shadow than light. Leadership is hard work for which one is regularly criticized and rarely rewarded. So it is understandable that we need to bolster ourselves with positive thoughts. But by failing to look at our shadows, we feed a dangerous delusion that leaders too often indulge, that our efforts are always well-intended. Our power is always benign, and the problem is always in those difficult people whom we are trying to lead. Those of us who readily embrace leadership, especially public leadership, tend towards extroversion, which often means ignoring what is happening inside ourselves. If we have any sort of inner life, we compartmentalize it, walling it off from our public work. This, of course, allows the shadow to grow unchecked until it emerges larger than life in the public realm, a problem we are well acquainted with in our own domestic politics. Leaders need not only the technical skills to manage the external world, but also the spiritual skills to journey inward toward the source of both shadow and light. Spirituality, like leadership, is a hard thing to define, but Annie Dillard has given us a vivid image of what authentic spirituality is about. We quote here, "In the deeps are the violence and terror of which psychology has warned us. But if you ride these monsters down, if you drop with them farther over the world's rim, you find what our sciences cannot locate or name. The substrate, the ocean or matrix or ether, which buoys the rest, which gives goodness its power for good, and evil its power for evil, the unified field. Our complex and inexplicable caring for each other and for our life together here. This is given, it is not learned. End of quote. Here, Dillard names two crucial features of any spiritual journey. One is that it will take us inward and downward, toward the hardest realities of our lives, rather than outward and upward toward abstraction, idealization, and exhortation. The spiritual journey runs counter to the power of positive thinking. Why must we go in and down? Because as we do so, we will meet the darkness that we carry within ourselves, the ultimate source of the shadows that we project onto other people. If we do not understand that the enemy is within, we will find 1,000 ways of making someone out there into the enemy, becoming leaders who oppress rather than liberate others. But, says Annie Dillard, if we ride those monsters all the way down, we break through to something precious, to the unified field, our complex and inexplicable caring for each other, to the community we share beneath the broken surface of our lives. Good leadership comes from people who have penetrated their own inner darkness and arrived at the place where we are at one with one another. People who can lead the rest to a place of hidden wholeness, because they have been there and know the way. Václav Havel would be familiar with the journey Annie Dillard describes, because downward is where you go when you spend years pinned under a boulder. That image suggests not only the political oppression under which all Czechs were forced to live, but also the psychological depression Havel fell into as he struggled to survive under the communist regime. In 1975, that depression compelled Havel to write an open letter of protest to Gustav Husak, head of the Czechoslovak Communist Party. His letter, which got Havel thrown in jail and became the text of an underground movement that fomented the Velvet Revolution of 1989, was, in Havel's own words, an act of autotherapy, an alternative to suicide, his expression of the decision to live divided no more. As Vincent and Jane Kowalowski have written, Havel, quote, felt that he could remain silent only at the risk of living a lie and destroying himself from within, end of quote. That is the choice before us when we are pinned under a boulder of any sort. The same choice Nelson Mandela made by using 28 years in prison to prepare inwardly for leadership instead of drowning in despair. Under the most oppressive circumstances, people like Mandela, Havel, and uncounted others go all the way down, travel through their inner darkness, and emerge with the capacity to lead the rest of us toward community, toward our complex and inexplicable caring for each other. Annie Dillard offers a powerful image of the inner journey and tells us what might happen if we were to take it. But why would anybody want to take a journey of that sort, with its multiple difficulties and dangers? Everything in us cries out against it, which is why we externalize everything. It is so much easier to deal with the external world, to spend our lives manipulating material and institutions and other people instead of dealing with our own souls. We like to talk about the outer world as if it were infinitely complex and demanding, but it is a cakewalk compared to the labyrinth of our inner lives. Here is a small story from my life about why one might want to take the inner journey. In my early 40s, I decided to go on a program called Outward Bound. I was on the edge of my first depression, a fact I knew only dimly at the time, and I thought Outward Bound might be a place to shake up my life and learn some things I needed to know. I chose the week-long course at Hurricane Island, off the coast of Maine. I should have known from that name what was in store for me. Next time, I will sign up for the course at Happy Gardens or Pleasant Valley. Though it was a week of great teaching, deep community, and genuine growth, it was also a week of fear and loathing. In the middle of that week, I faced the challenge I feared most. One of our instructors backed me up to the edge of a cliff 110 feet above solid ground. He tied a very thin rope to my waist, a rope that looked ill-kempt to me and seemed to be starting to unravel, and told me to start rappelling down that cliff. "Do what?" I said. "Just go," the instructor explained, in typical Outward Bound fashion. So I went and immediately slammed into a ledge, some 4 feet down from the edge of the cliff, with bone-jarring, brain-jarring force. The instructor looked down at me. "I don't think you've quite got it." "Right," said I, being in no position to disagree. "So what am I supposed to do?" "The only way to do this," he said, "is to lean back as far as you can. You have to get your body at right angles to the cliff so that your weight will be on your feet. It's counterintuitive, but it's the only way that works." I knew that he was wrong, of course. I knew that the trick was to hug the mountain, to stay as close to the rock face as I could. So I tried it again, my way, and slammed into the next ledge, another 4 feet down. "You still don't have it," the instructor said helpfully. "Okay," I said. "Tell me again what I am supposed to do." "Lean way back," said he, "and take the next step." The next step was a very big one, but I took it, and, wonder of wonders, it worked. I leaned back into empty space, eyes fixed on the heavens in prayer, made tiny, tiny moves with my feet, and started descending down the rock face, gaining confidence with every step. I was about halfway down when the second instructor called up from below. "Parker, I think you'd better stop and see what's just below your feet." I lowered my eyes very slowly so as to not shift my weight, and saw that I was approaching a deep hole in the face of the rock. To get down, I would have to get around that hole, which meant I could not maintain the straight line of descent I had started to get comfortable with. I would need to change course and swing myself around that hole, to the left or to the right. I knew for a certainty that attempting to do so would lead directly to my death. So I froze, paralyzed with fear. The second instructor let me hang there, trembling in silence for what seemed like a very long time. Finally, she shouted up these helpful words. "Parker, is anything wrong?" To this day, I do not know where my words came from, though I have 12 witnesses to the fact that I spoke them. In a high, squeaky voice, I said, "I don't want to talk about it." "Then," said the instructor, "it's time that you learn the Outward Bound motto." Oh, keen, I thought. I'm about to die and she's going to give me a motto. But then she shouted 10 words I hope never to forget. Words whose impact and meaning I can still feel. "If you can't get out of it, get into it." I had long believed in the concept of quote, "the word become flesh," unquote. But until that moment, I had not experienced it. Yeah, so wait, I'm just going to go through that again. The Outward Bound motto, if you can't get out of it, get into it. There we go. My teacher spoke words so compelling that they bypassed my mind, went into my flesh, and animated my legs and feet. No helicopter would come to rescue me. The instructor on the cliff would not pull me up with the rope. There was no parachute on my back to float me to the ground. There was no way out of my dilemma except to get into it. So my feet started to move, and in a few minutes I made it safely down. Why would anyone want to embark on the daunting inner journey about which Annie Dillard writes? Because there is no way out of one's inner life, so one had better get into it. On the inward and downward spiritual journey, the only way out is in and through. So there you have it. You can't just watch one Mark Passio natural law seminar and then skip everything else and start yelling at people what to do with their lives, right? Hey, I've been there. And yeah, so it's about the shadow work. It's about the internal work. Does that work ever stop? I don't think so. And that is part of the vocation of the individual. Humbling yourself. That kind of thing, right? What else was I going to say? There was something else in here that really, really stood out, but not enough for me to remember it right now. So traveling into the darkness. So self-reflection, looking internally, doing that shadow work, realizing who you are, accepting who you are, humbling yourself in that way, brings you to a type of care for one another. It connects you to other people. And I think it just makes you a polite and a nice and sort of humble person. And there's something in all of that that promotes you to your vocation beyond just doing shadow work, right? It promotes you to leadership. You being who you are and acting in the world as a leader. And we live in a paradigm that we think we're not all supposed to be leaders or teachers. That's other people's jobs. And that's how we have government. And they're the leaders. And we're just supposed to let them lead or expect them to lead in a certain way. And if they don't, we're supposed to just complain about them. When really we should be looking inward and doing our work on ourselves. And doing that, we come to see the value of ourselves and the value of being part of this world and caring about what happens to each other. All right. That was a pretty good reflection there. All right. So moving to traveling companions, and part of Otherworld Connections, well, a big part of the Otherworld Connections is exploring the inner work, exploring the shadow work, trying to bring us internal, and acknowledging those of us that struggle with that. And Otherworld Connections looks at ways that we can go externally. We can look externally in the mindset of what external things can help our internal stuff going on that can bring us back to ourselves. And in this segment of Traveling Companions, we're going to look at pets, animals, and in particular dogs, companions on our inward journey. They can help us with our shadow work. Let's get reading. We're running out of time. Okay. Spirit Unleashed, Reimagining Human-Animal Relations by Anne Benvenuti, 2014. There's a lot of crossover here in these books. A whole perspective for living in a whole world. Here we go. Sometimes we have to compete with others around us to get enough energy to keep going, or to harness more energy to hoard for an imagined future, or even to give away to redistribute. Sometimes we cooperate, joining ourselves with others to get a group portion of energy to share amongst ourselves. And sometimes we give of what we have to energize another life or another group of lives. Our giving is often with the expectation of some direct or indirect return on our investment, but not always, and even when the gift has strings attached, it supports mutuality of being and reflects the relational nature of life. Giving, receiving, competing, cooperating, these are the activities of membership in life. A spiritual perspective gives us the best motivational stance, a good attitude, and perhaps some skill in knowing when to engage which of these activities. All mammals and most vertebrates seek interaction with others. There are multiple systems in mammalian bodies for experiencing the other, and few of them require thinking in any abstract way. Rather, knowledge of the other is direct and physical, whether by way of mirror neurons, subtle muscle mimicry, or hormones stimulated by one body in another. What is communicated in these direct biological ways is much more certain than the term theory of mind would suggest. An animal does not need to be able to consider in the abstract what the other is thinking or planning when he can know directly what an animal other is feeling in the very moment. If animals were running the experiments on humans, they might well ask the question, are they aware, and do they notice? Because we are humans, we need both clear thinking and deep feeling. But the world turns, it seems, on feeling more than on thinking, and we have lost our way at this very juncture, being so mesmerized by our left brain spin doctor that we cannot hear the right brain's effective messages so necessary for survival. The need to take social intelligence and all that it implies into account has driven a revolution towards reconsideration of the importance of affect, as evidenced in the work of so many affective and social neuroscientists. This taking into account of affect and social bonds has had such impact on the biological and psychological sciences that Alan Shaw refers to it as a paradigm shift, moving, quote, from explicit, analytical, conscious, verbal, rational, left hemisphere to implicit, synthetic, integrative, unconscious, non-verbal, bodily-based, emotional, right hemisphere, end quote. Another way to describe it would be to say that in order to understand ourselves as humans, we need to take into account the greater part of ourselves, the part we share with all mammals, the very parts cast off by Descartes. As Thomas Kuhn would say of a paradigm shift, we were running into walls because the concepts and constructs we were using as a framework to understand human behavior were not adequate to the task. The study of the biology and neuroscience of social connections and affects has revolutionized the fields of psychology and biology by making them inseparable, as they actually are in the living world. Not only are mammals wired for connection to each other, but biological scientists recognize among both animals and humans a compassionate instinct. Some of the studies are old, and the fact that there are few from the intervening decades points to the paradigm in which scientists were working, a mechanistic paradigm in which emotions were considered unmeasurable and therefore unsuitable to study. In a 1964 study of rhesus monkeys, for example, monkeys were found to refuse food if they knew that their use of the lever by which food was gotten would also lead to electric shock to another monkey. One monkey in the study went without food for 12 days, starving itself, rather than cause shock to another monkey. More recently, a series of experiments by neuroscientists at the University of Chicago demonstrated empathy and pro-social behavior in rats. Rats were paired with one in a free condition and one held in a restrainer. The free rats quickly learned how to open the restrainers and soon routinely and consistently freed restrained rats, even when given the alternative choice of a chocolate treat. When liberating a cage mate was pitted against chocolate contained within a second restrainer, Rats opened both restrainers and typically shared the chocolate. A host of studies revealed that mammals from infants to humans to chimpanzees to rats routinely engage in prosocial behavior, even at a cost to themselves, such as having to overcome an obstacle or go without food, and that they seem to do so because it is pleasurable. So looking externally to understand the internal. Okay? So if you're struggling to understand yourself, you can look externally to the animal world. And that most likely means acquiring a pet. There's plenty out there that need to be rescued. Moving on to Love Dogs from the book Spirit Unleashed by Benvenuti. Here we go. Molly Brown, that little brown and white Jack Russell Terrier, whom I met on her first day of life and whom I held on the day of her death, was my constant friend and teacher. In the weeks after her death, I clung to the idea that she would be reincarnated, soon and recognizably. I knew that such a thought is selfish, if not silly. But I also learned in those weeks that there are worse dispositions than that of going through daily life, asking of every living thing, "Are you my beloved? Are you my beloved?" The most important, immediate, and shocking thing I learned when I met baby Molly was that I had a heart. At first, and for several years, I thought this opening of my ossified heart was significant because Molly created a path to my heart for other humans. Soon after Molly arrived, I entered into a long and happy relationship, and I acknowledged her, calling her Molly the Baptist, because she prepared my heart for human habitation. When that relationship ended, many years later, it was Molly who comforted me, Molly who never left my side. Over the almost 15 years in her company, oh bless, that's a long time, I learned that the love of Anne and Molly is a real love, something of its own, and that my engaged heart supplies the pulse, connecting me to the rhythms of everything. Yes, everything. A 15-pound dog with star-deep eyes had opened me to the universe through my heart. Molly Brown was the doorway through which I walked from the mundane into the magical, out of the world and into the world. From Molly, I learned that my thoughts about the world are not the world, that the world is real and out there, filtered for me through my thoughts, yes, but immediately available, direct, gazing, speaking and dancing through my senses into my open heart. Perhaps the grandest thing I learned from Molly Brown, slowly and over many years, is that we cannot be human without the guidance and support of the non-human world. Not merely as crass commodity for our consumption, as we are taught to see it, but as companion, as friend, as teacher, as parent. Mother Earth indeed. Father Sky, grandfather and grandmother stars, not figuratively, but literally, all speaking to us continuously in the language of the body. Love one little thing and you love the entire universe that holds it, as well as the essence from which it pours forth, and the pulse that beats in it, and the breath that heaves it, and the awareness that connects it. Save one little thing and you save your soul entire. That tiny, desperate thirst is indeed your own, and you are quenched beyond measure, awakened in the water merely for being there, responsive. This is what I learned from Molly Brown slowly over the many years of her patient instruction, that words hinder the communications of the heart, acting often as stoppers of the ears of empathy, which would otherwise hear every pulsing, breathing body. God speaks to us secretly and in silence, said John of the Cross. Perhaps the language of God is silenced, because only in silence can I deeply listen. There's that theme of silence there, folks, again. And God is not shallow. The whole world is here,
waiting to be heard, but I am too busy producing private words and thoughts to listen to it. I am so lulled by my word-making that I don't even know I am doing it most of the time. In silence, words are reborn and they become something expressive, something worthy of care. In silence, we learn love. Surprise! The whole world is a message under the words. What I learned by way of Molly Brown, she who would be understood and not just condescended to, is that the whole world is there, waiting to be known, interested in me as I am interested in it. That we, multitudinous and embodied, are also inseparable and in love. And here's a funny question that I just came up with. Say you had a dog. And you may already have one, but say, thinking of all of this, you go and acquire a pet dog. And you become bonded with that dog. Well, and you didn't want to leave your dog alone during the day. Think about what jobs could you do with your dog. Like, where could you take your dog with you to work? What kind of jobs would they be? Don't say police dog. Because a police dog is not a pet dog, okay? That's a working dog. I'm talking a pet, your friend, your best buddy. What kind of job would you be able to do where you could take that dog? Well, first off, it would involve the charity of somebody to say, okay, you can bring him along, tie him up outside, right? Anyway, I think that's a good question. You certainly would not be able to take your dog into Parliament with you, I'm pretty sure. All right. Oh, okay. Here's another little bit that I want to read about dogs. From The Grace of Dogs. A Boy, a Black Lab, and a Father's Search for the Canine Soul. By Andrew Root. Published in 2017. What's the motive? Oh, that's Ernie's mum. Barking and crying out there. To read others and connect deeply is a beautiful and powerful thing. But this capacity doesn't mean that every relationship we have is spiritual or even productive. Sometimes people connect with us to hurt us, to deceive us, to use our spiritual capacities in some way against us. While my friend, the theology professor, was wrong about dogs being mindless, perhaps he was right that they are just con artists. Are dogs like the handsome gold-digging hunk who woos the older women with his sensitivity and openness only to gain access to her bank account? It's very clear that dogs are able to attune to our personal frequency. But if this is truly spiritual, then it has to be deeper than just tuning into us. What is their motive? If they have merely found a way to connect to us for their own reasons, for survival or for gain, then it doesn't seem mutual, transcendent, or spiritual. Do they really want to be with us for the sake of being with us? Do they enjoy our presence and seek experiences that don't necessarily benefit them functionally? In other words, are dogs smart enough simply to exploit our spiritual proclivities? Or are dogs actually part of our spiritual connection with God and others? Is this experience somehow mutual, a two-way street? Dogs seek our faces and read our gestures, and this pulls deeply at the spiritual chords of our being. We feel drawn toward the experience of transcendence, but does the dog? It was to these questions that my search now turned. And that was just a little teaser for that book. But I say yes. Dogs are part of our spiritual connection with God and others, as we read in the previous book, Spirit Unleashed. And these things are, like everything good, are discoverable, full stop.
by going out there and having faith that that might be true and experiencing it for ourselves. And through the experience, well, that's maybe where the shadow work begins. So what am I trying to say? Let's wrap this up with a couple of minutes to go. Our vocation as human beings is to be ourselves, be authentic, be leaders and teachers in our day-to-day, whoever we are and whatever we do. To find out who we are and what we should do, we look inwards. We should struggle, we should suffer to follow our heart and reflect on who we are. And we should do this. And in this process of suffering and looking inwards, in this shadow work, we will find spirit and the objective morals found in spirit, right and wrong. And we should lead and teach with this knowledge in mind. And if this is all a bit general, and if it's all a bit vague in a way, and you don't know where to start, well, Otherworld Connections is here to help, me and you. You can start by acquiring a pet dog. Your dog will show you the way over time, just like the dog and the tarot on the Fool card. Huh? Very interesting. Yeah. That's it. Not much more to say. My dog Ernie found a hedgehog who seemed to be struggling out there in the garden. There wasn't much I could do, but Ernie was making a crying sound at night. He wouldn't come in, and it was pitch black at night, and he's a black dog, so I couldn't really see him. So I got the torch and I found him, and he was trying to help a hedgehog who I think was feigning illness because of Ernie being around, but he was nudging the little hedgehog, trying to help the hedgehog along. Where does that sit with everything? Well, I'm not entirely sure, but you can look at animal symbolism. Dr. Stephen Farmer's work is pretty cool, and you can look at, say, what a hedgehog symbolises, and perhaps that was the message for me. All right, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you at the next one. Love you all. Bye.